Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Crypto Hipsters podcast, where I interview founders and co founders, entrepreneurs and artists, executives and stay at home hipsters in crypto and blockchain around the world. And I have an amazing podcast for you today. Let's get to it. And today I have a very interesting guest. He helps lots of people. His name is Athan Slotkin. He is the Shadow CEO. Athan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So your background, is it a logical background to what you do now? What you do now as a Shadow CEO?
Depending upon your definition of logical, yes. We'll some road there, I guess. So I came from consulting originally, and so my job was to pull apart businesses and problems and figure out where they need to go. Right. Fast forward, I was a very mediocre corporate citizen, always creating my own businesses. So ever since I was 10 years old, I was creating my own businesses. Some successful, some I kind of tested, and I didn't like where it was going, so I put it aside. All kinds of things, and I've just, as a result of that, I've just seen a lot of businesses, and so people started to ask for help with theirs. All kinds of weird things that that come to me, and so my job is to not only point them in the right direction and make sure their business is strategically right and being optimized and packaged correctly and all that stuff, but I also kind of have to monitor everything that's going on, right? And one of those things, as you know very well, is blockchain, crypto, NFTs, that whole world as well. And if I don't do that, I'm not doing my job.
And what do you think sets you apart from the other consultants in this space?
I think I've seen a whole lot of things, and I think I've tried a whole lot of things myself too. So, I'd say for my time, I spend probably 70% of my time doing this stuff. But the other 30%, I have my own businesses that that I have existing or developing, and that's always been the case. And I think it's a little different than, kind of conceptually, thinking through where a business should go, and also versus actually understanding what it's like being an entrepreneur and being able to meld, having run or developed different businesses, how they fit together, what the trends are, things like that. So I think it's the combination maybe of having just done a whole lot of stuff in the past, mixed with the fact that I care a lot about monitoring every single thing that's going on in the market, because even though any given person's business may not be exactly in that industry, everything else informs what their strategy should be, right? Like you can compile that together to make a very rich stew, for lack of a better description, even if it's not coming from the direct industry.
Awesome. So we're going to talk about that stew today. You've been helping college students or advising college students on what to look for in the market, and you identified 4 areas. And can you briefly touch on them, and then we'll get into each one in detail?
Yeah. So first off, I would suggest looking for reputable news sources. Now, it's a little tricky at times, right? But like we all can, kind of attest to the fact that there's tons of noise out there right now, tons of social media channels that exist, different people on the social media channels, news channels, being able to discern what's real and what's fake, and then being able to codify that data between it. Both real and fake news moves markets, right? Because not everybody can discern things like that. So being able to understand what the different news sources are, and therefore how credible they are and how it influences information, that's number one. Number 2 is crypto markets and blockchain, and even NFTs for that matter. They're very nascent, and because they're nascent, meaning not many people have touched them or invested in them, they're very volatile, right? Like if you contrast it to the stock market or even bonds, right, even less so. Those are not so volatile, right? Like they've been developed. Obviously, bonds function a little bit differently, but the equities markets, they've been established for a long time. Therefore, they're pretty protected in terms of the downside. There's less upside, but there's less volatility typically. Crypto and NFTs and the blockchain world, it's more volatile. Information is not perfect. Being able to execute on trades is not nearly as perfect. It's not as codified. Now, that presents incredible opportunity but it also creates more volatility. So you need to learn to get comfortable with more about the decision making, and how you're utilizing your bankroll, and a little bit less so in terms of what the outcomes are, because sometimes we can't control that volatility. And so with that, it kind of came from my poker playing days, but learning self-control. So making sure that your bet sizing is correct when you're investing, that you're not playing above your bankroll, quote unquote. But then also understanding what you can control and what you can't. And what you can control is distilling information and making decisions. What you can't control is what the outcomes are from those. So you just have to kind of stay level. And then lastly, the commitment to the overall market. There's a little bit of an information advantage that exists as you start to understand the markets, right? So if you're going to take the time to invest in this, take the time to invest in it for the mid game or the long game, right? Not just the short game. There are, of course, ways to make money quick, but there's always ways to make money quick in different buckets. This is one in the crypto and blockchain space that will reward people who invest time into it, because it's quite complex. There's so much going on, and information is imperfect, that it could really put you in incredible advantage, especially as a young person, if you invest your time and energy to really understanding this space.
Great. Thank you. So I have a follow-up on each one of those points. And the first one is we'll talk about the news sources, right? So how does a student just starting out in crypto, how do they identify what is the right news source, which one's credible or not? How do they do that?
It's a little bit tricky at times. I'll be the first to admit, but we let data speak at the end of the day, right? So look towards data and facts and hard numbers, right? Like opinions are not facts and hard numbers unless they're backed by facts and hard numbers. So the way that we check that is we verify data sources, right? We if somebody says something makes sense, we are so lucky in that we have access to these a plethora of online resources that exist. Verify the information. See if you could find anything else that suggests that it makes sense. Publications that suggest the data is correct. If you can't, either it's a good, interesting piece of information that most people don't have, or maybe it's not a fully backed piece of information that was made up, right? And then you make your own assessment in terms of how you want to weigh that. So I think that's that. And then on the opinion side of things, I almost look more for the logic than I do the outcome of the opinion, to be honest with you, right? Like I want to know why they're landing where they're landing, more so than where they're landing. Like, anybody for any student that's listening to this and thinking about investing, the logic and the thought process is almost more important than the actual conclusion, which you can come to yourself, in my opinion. So if you're doing fundamental analysis, which is what's happening with the companies and how are they constructed and what's their plan that they have and on the project, and tokenomics and things like that, right? That's core fundamental information you take to then draw the conclusion about where you think this fits in the ecosystem. Similarly, if you get yourself into technical analysis, right, you can utilize data to determine, where you think everything's going based on trends and waves and patterns and things like that, right? You don't have to so much worry about, what the person's conclusion is. Pay attention to what their logic is. And if their logic is good and you can understand it and you can follow along with it, then you may have someone that you want to use as a go-to information source, because God knows these days there's a lot of information out there, and no person has enough time between Twitter, TikTok, digital news sources, Discords, Telegrams, to be able to follow every single thing. So you have to do the best with the time you have, and so figuring out those go-to news sources is a really important version of that.
What if the reader looked at the author and identified if they had the similar purpose or reason that they do it as if you're going to school? Would that help?
Yeah, I mean, I think it helps, and oftentimes it's comforting to know that somebody else has a similar opinion. But I'll tell you something kind of interesting. That's an analogy to this. So I still have my Facebook account, and on my Facebook account, you kind of have like your wider network and, see messages, things like that. As you know, in the past several years, like there have been a lot of political messages put on there, things like that, right? I have my own opinions and everybody has their own, and that's okay, right? Like everyone's entitled to their own opinions. Needless to say, though, for anybody, there are some opinions you're going to see, especially in this day, that may be a bit more polarized, and you're kind of surprised coming from some people in your network. But what I do is I don't block those people out. I don't cancel those messages or block those messages so I don't see them. I want to be exposed to those messages. Those messages are getting out there into the world and the marketplace. And if you're not exposing yourself to that data, then you are missing part of the equation. And your job as an investor is to gather all data, not just the data that perfectly aligns with what you believe, but all data that's out there to determine where you think this is going and why something might be a good investment. So it may be painful sometimes to hear somebody disagree or otherwise, but I think it's an actual really valuable thing to hear those opposing views.
Great. So you mentioned before, in addition to media, you mentioned volatility, and we certainly have seen that recently. How do you cipher through what's regular market volatility versus what is still an unregulated market? What's, I guess, manipulation, or what are your pointers there? How to decipher through all that?
I think it kind of depends on your investment horizon to some extent, right? Like for me, I'm a fundamental person, and so I look at the project and the project quality and the tokenomics and that kind of data, because all things equal over time, that is going to be the determinant, right? If it's a very good project that's positioned correctly in the landscape, it will get there over time, right? So if I have a project that I like, what I'm looking at are what's the current situation with the market cap and the liquidity? B, what do the tokenomics look like in terms of is that market cap and therefore token price potentially going to continue to grow? And then I just have confidence at that point that it's going to get there, that good projects that make sense, that are solid, are going to rise, right? All things equal. I will be the first to point out that even if you have very good logic and even if you invest in fundamentally strong projects, you're not always going to get it right. So you have to get comfortable in the fact that knowing it's a game of odds, right? And let's just say you invest in a bunch of low cap projects, right, that are very nascent, that maybe have a $10 million market cap. You're going to miss on some good chunk of those, right? But the whole idea is that the ones that don't miss are going to way outperform what you lose from the ones that do miss. And it doesn't mean that your strategy wasn't sound. It just means that even if your strategy was sound, sometimes you're not right. Sometimes you lose, and that's okay. If you have a shorter time horizon and maybe you're focused on day trading or swing trading, that a little bit changes the equation. And I think in those cases, looking at the data and following the indicators and determining what indicators you want to use is probably more determined than actually listening to the noise outside. So literally just becoming, for lack of a better description, a data robot and a data machine that ingests and doesn't so much pay attention to the outside noise is probably a better strategy than actually trying to discern what's real, what's manipulation, what's not, even though I think you will pick that up over time. So, again, to contrast fundamental long-term view, the manipulation should not matter so much because over time, the good projects are going to rise. And if you're, more of a trader, on the swing or day trading side of things, just follow the data and the trends that are going on, and then study, what you think other people in the market may be following as well, because that's an important input too.
So I understand that day trading is good for those finance students, but say the liberal arts, the engineers, the architects, and then you said fundamentals, right? And
yeah,
they're college students, so they don't really fully understand the markets out there yet. They will as they start working. What advice would you give them as far as what projects are out there that are not just finance, that are relate to what they do? How can they do that?
Yeah, so anybody can become a specialist in any subject matter, right? So the whole premise behind blockchain is decentralizing concepts and things that already exist in the centralized world, right? And that's going to go for everything. That's going to go for financial, that's going to go for supply chain, that's going to go for insurance, a whole variety of industries, and that will be across verticals too. That'll be for architecture, that'll be everything you can come up with, right? So you have to think about what your advantage is as an investor, right? And what your advantage in the case you're describing as investors is you have subject matter expertise in one particular area. So for instance, I may be pretty wide because I know how startups function, projects function, and how the ecosystem overall fits. but I don't have a whole lot of expertise in what's going on in the architecture world and what would be appropriate and what project innovations might make sense. But a student coming out of college that went through a rigorous architecture program might have a very good sense of what would make sense there. So I think it's a question of knowing what you know really well, and therefore what's your competitive advantage in the market, and being able to focus on that. And it's okay if it's just one vertical or one functional area. Just know what it is you know, and that what you don't know, maybe be a little bit more cautious about, in terms of ramping up. You have the opportunity to learn it. Everybody can learn, and nobody comes, just magically wakes up and knows everything. It's impossible. But start with what you definitively know well and make that your core investment area. And then you can expand out, utilize YouTube, Udemy, all these incredible online course tools that exist every single day. And it's humbling, but every single day I wake up and I'm realizing new things that I have no idea about whatsoever. So what I do is I go online. I happen to be more of a visual person or an audio person, not so much a reading person. And so I go and I find either a course or a podcast or a video on explaining the concept that I don't understand. And so make sure you just continue to be hungry as a student. You're always going to have to learn. That never changes, because these days with tech, the world is evolving faster than our knowledge probably evolves, to be honest with you.
And would you say that applies to both, not only college students, but people in their 50s?
Yeah, but the college students have more of a hope right now because they're closer to learning and being comfortable with education. Those of us that are a little bit older, we're maybe a little bit lazier now, to be honest with you, and think we know it. The college students have got it in their pocket at this point. So just always be hungry to keep learning as a college student or recent college student. And the good news about it is you're not going to get any grades. There's no midterms or pop quizzes or anything else like that. Your pop quiz is about to become how much do you know the information, and the investment performance will tell ultimately what the results are.
Yep, I agree. The next one is you talked about self-control, and then you also mentioned in that same sentence, you mentioned poker, because you used to play poker. So I wanted to find out how your poker background applies to the concept of an application of self-control.
Yeah, this is, I'm surprised. Maybe it's because I have bias here coming from the poker world, but as I talk with people around me every day, this seems to be the hardest one actually for many people. And it's because, anything else you can learn, right? You can learn about an industry, you can learn about specific projects, you can learn about blockchain, whatever else, right? But the only way that you can kind of maintain self-control when you're investing decent amount of money and it's not going in your direction. For instance, the past couple of days, we've seen 50% drops, 60% drops, 80% drops in some cases. I mean, it's been a little bit wild, right? The only way you learn that is kind of by having it happen sometimes and not focusing so much on the output, focusing more on the input. Were my decisions correct, right? Did I make the right initial decision? And now, what is the best decision that I could make, right? It has nothing to do with what happened in the past. It's at the current point in time. And so you almost have to learn, I don't want to say numb yourself, but almost learn to kind of a little bit, numb yourself from that volatility, the emotional side of it, because, and I'm not saying that in a bad way, because you have to just make pragmatic, rational decisions, right? And so, what poker teaches you, I mean, if I tell you that the number of times I've gotten, for anybody that's played poker before, right, is you're trying to make good decisions, the best decisions humanly possible. And for anybody that plays, everyone knows that pocket aces are the best hand, who plays Hold'em, pocket aces are the best hand before the flop. And you can put all your chips in the middle of the pot before the flop and be a 90% favorite to win, and you're still going to lose 10% of the time. There's no way around it. And so, what that means is, if we run that 1,000 times, I'm probably going to win 900 of them, but I'm also going to lose 100 of them. And so, in my experience, I've had that many, that happened many, many times where I put it in good and it didn't pan out right. And over time, you just have to get used to that. The fact that sometimes you're going to do, everything right or have a good strategy, and it's not going to work. And that's, a little bit of a metaphor for life, I guess, to some extent too. You just have to not be bothered by that. Know that things sometimes are going to happen out of your control, and just keep making good decisions. If you keep making good decisions in the investing world and otherwise, it is going to work out. You want to get to this statistical long run, I guess you'd say, right? The more times you run it, the more hands that you play, quote unquote, you are going to wind up winning because you are a better player than your competition. And that's where you want to get to, right? Even the best players are not going to win 100% of the time. You can't have those expectations. But you just want to keep making good bets and good decisions. And over time, you'll get more comfortable with knowing that sometimes you lose.
When would be a good time to go all in versus when it would be a good time to run away?
So interesting point is, it's kind of like ties to diversification, right? Like there's almost nothing I can think of on earth where I would suggest going all in on it, to be honest with you, other than when you're forced to maybe at a cash game, but or a tournament. But when you're investing, never would I suggest anybody puts all of their chips into one specific project, right? Be it Bitcoin, be it Ethereum, be it an NFT. Never would I suggest that. Never would I suggest anybody putting all their money into crypto. I would never suggest that. Equally, never would I suggest anybody putting all their money into, stocks and equities, nor into art or whatever it is, right? I mean, the thing is there's these like very obvious risks that exist, right? Which is some project may not pan out, or stock, token price or coin price may be volatile, or whatever else it is. But then there's these wider questions that exist, right? Which is, what happens if the global economy gets hurt and could put a very big dampener on, the crypto markets? Or what happens if certain countries, ban crypto or say that they're banning crypto, which we've heard a little bit of, and it's not all too possible, but it's these big externalities. What happens if COVID happens again, right? It's these big externalities that you can't account for that are not necessarily project specific that would suggest that there would be a very large shockwave that would happen. And if you're not diversified with your investments, you're just prone to having too much of an upset. The one note I will make about that is, the younger you are, the more you can afford to take a little bit more risk. And the reason is because, you don't have as much, you still have room to be able to grow and recover it. But, as people get older, like me, and we start to get older, our time to be able to recover those risks goes down a little bit to some extent, right? So as a younger person, you can afford to take those risks, but just, always make sure you're managing your quote unquote bankroll, right? And it's no different than, you wouldn't go to a poker game, and if you only had $10,000 to your name, put all $10,000 on the table at that point. Even if you were a really good player, that would be a really bad decision. So you have to look at the big picture, so maybe you have $10,000 and you're sitting at the game with no more than $500, because in case something happens, and things do happen sometimes, and if it happens for a string, you're not going to run out of money and run into an issue at that point, right? So this concept of financial bankroll management, diversification, definitely comes into play even in crypto markets.
Awesome. I agree. And one of the things that you were alluding to there a little bit, you didn't say the word, but the word is fear, that I picked up on. And, you say people should be committed, right? What's the difference between, I've seen people committed, I've seen people with hardcore conviction. What do you see the differences between being committed and having conviction, and how do you navigate the difference, and how do you get there to aligning the project you're invested in with your beliefs?
Yeah, what a good question. It's like nuanced verbiage there too. It's a really great question. I mean, when I hear you say the word conviction, the thing that causes pause for me there is, working with entrepreneurs and people, you do have to have conviction, right? Like, a lot of people around you are not going to see nor believe what it is you see. And so you have to have that conviction. Otherwise, it's going to be tough to brush aside when people are naysaying or otherwise. However, the thing that makes me a little uncomfortable is, you have to be open to other opinions too, right? So yes, conviction, yes, driving forward. But if there's data suggesting otherwise, you have to be open to that. You can't be have such blind conviction that nothing else is humanly possible, right? Like, your job is to be the CEO of your business, the CEO of your life, right? Be it, your company or your financials, whatever else it is. And your job is to pay attention to data at the end of the day, right? So even if you're quite confident something may be the case, it's possible that other data suggests that maybe you missed something, or maybe something slightly different than what you expected, right? So I guess that's the one thing that jumps out to me as I hear conviction. It is a fine line sometimes between having that kind of that gumption and push to really go attack something which you do really need, right? If it's your own business, if it's crypto in early days and not everybody's attached to it, if it's NFTs, which three-quarters of society were calling crazy, and you think make a whole lot of sense. Early adopters, early movers, entrepreneurs are always going to have naysayers that exist. There's no getting around it. Just try to be open to the data as well, and being pliable to mold what your views are. That doesn't mean a complete 180. It doesn't mean you have to completely dispel it, but be open to the data.
Great. So I want to follow up there is, years ago, I did a landmark education forum and curriculum for living. And they say that if you build a pie of the world of everything that you know and don't know, and 5% is what you know, 5% is what you know that you don't know, and 90% is what you don't know that you don't know. Navigating that space is crypto. What are your suggestions to navigating that area of what you don't know that you don't know?
I think the only way you uncover and convert it from what you don't know that you don't know to what you know that you don't know is by spending time, right? Like I'm trying to think as you're talking about it, about like how I spend my days ramping up and learning more, in this world and otherwise. And what I'm doing is I'm engaging in forums and discords and things like that and having discussions. And what you get out of that and engaging with people is, you get more exposure to different ideas and different concepts and people who are focused on different things. And that exposure by nature uncovers things that you didn't even know existed, but now all of a sudden you have to know exist. So maybe that's where your commitment comment comes perfectly in, which is, if you're aware enough to know, well, this is going to sound a little meta. If you're aware enough to know that there are a lot of things that you don't know, right? Then you'll be willing to put in the time and start to uncover what those things are. After which point you'll just have to dedicate time and learning to be able to study and whatever else. So I think the only real solution for that is time, right? It's time. Sorry, time and spending time around and exposing yourself to other people. It's almost like an equal reason why I'm a huge proponent, especially as young people, of traveling a whole lot. And it's because, especially in this world, we're in a very digital global economy now, right? You have the ability to deal with projects and investments and businesses and customers on a global scale, which many people didn't have earlier, right? However, you can't appropriately serve those people or deal with those projects unless you understand these different cultures and how they operate. So it's the same rationale in this case, which is you don't know how another culture operates, how they think, how they want to be sold to, or anything else until you expose it. So same concept, like go and expose yourself to other cultures and understand other people, and you'll uncover things that you never even thought were a consideration. And so I think going into a Discord or a Reddit forum or something is just a microcosm for traveling on a topic, I guess.
Excellent. I traveled the world when I was 32 or 3. Can't remember. A little bit backpacking, but so I was interested in how you saw that. Thank you. So I want to thank you very much for your time today. It's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. So my last question is, how can people find out more information about you, about your work, about what you do, and contact you?
Yeah. So just going to my website is probably a good place to start. It's just athanslotkin.com. When your name is Athan Slotkin, it makes it pretty easy for to procure assets and URLs, by the way. Just go to athanslotkin.com. I have a contact on there. I have some social media too, although I've been a little bit quieter on there lately, just busy with some things. So I'd say the best place would be website, and I have a contact on there. I always love to hear from entrepreneurs and their stories. Love hearing those.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.